This is Decarbonize the World with Frank Deline, solving the climate crisis while increasing profits in your business. Here's Frank.
Welcome back to my conversation with Barry Glickman, Honeywell's GM of Sustainable Technology Solutions. We've been talking about how Honeywell is working to make a measurable and meaningful reduction in global greenhouse gas emissions. Barry, you've been quoted as saying that industries need to quicken their pace to reduce their emissions in order to meet their carbon reduction targets. Talk to me about timelines. How fast can companies speed up their pace?
I think the tools are out there for any company that wants to reduce particularly their scope 1 and 2 emissions
Right.
over a single digit number of years. Honeywell has publicly committed to be net zero on scopes 1 and 2 by 2035 and has committed to publicly intermediate milestones on the path to net zero. I don't think there's anything stopping other companies from doing the same.
So it's about the technology is there, but it's about the companies making the commitment to, as Honeywell has done, making those kind of commitments to make it happen. I think that's what you're referring to.
I'll say there's an element of will. There's
Right.
an element of government support
Right.
that was dramatically addressed, at least in the United States, by the Inflation Reduction Act.
Correct.
And then there's an element of customer pull. So when consumers begin in greater numbers to demand suppliers to be greener, or at least to be significantly lower carbon intensive, companies will react to that. So I'd like to see it coming from both a push and a pull.
Mm-hmm.
The comment I think you were referring to, I was really talking about a global context, which was when I look at the pathway to 1.5 degrees
Right.
versus the path we're on now,
Mm-hmm.
it's clearly insufficient in terms of what we're doing and how quickly we're doing it.
Yeah, I hear that from a lot of people, and especially, just going through Davos now. And the IPCC, I mean, they just for the first time in the sixth assessment report, first time they addressed the demand side about the consumers. And this is actually what the premise is of what I've developed, what's addressed in the book, because it's a market-driven approach that the consumer is the one that makes the choice and puts the pressure on corporations to make that change.
I'm also a free market person, and I think the quicker we put a price on carbon,
Right.
the faster the market will take the appropriate steps. It doesn't need to be a tax; it could be a subsidy. There's multiple ways to skin it, but we
Right.
have to price the externality transparently.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as we do that, right, you've seen it I think on SOx and NOx and other elements, at least of the U.S. power gen system, where if you put a clear price target on it, the suppliers will do brilliantly in finding ways to reduce the impact, and the consumers will send the right signals to the marketplace.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it, actually. Can you tell me more about the demand for clean hydrogen? What's it looking like now, and what do you see it like in the next 20 to 30 years?
Today, it is there for sort of the emerging over-the-road transportation application.
Mm-hmm.
And the application that's easiest for me to get my head around is if I am a trucking company, or I'm a UPS or U.S. Postal Service, or someone who is driving heavier vehicles over a reasonably predictable route. I'm too big to electrify.
Right.
I'm a great candidate for hydrogen.
Right.
That to me is the soonest, clearest, most obvious application.
Right.
as we get more and more renewable power, we're going to have more and more periods of excess renewable power, which makes hydrogen a more attractive form of energy storage. So now I can start thinking about, do I want to make off-peak green hydrogen and put it into a pipeline and use it as a heating fuel? Do I want to put it into a cavern and use it as long-term storage? I think that will emerge, but it'll emerge as we get our energy mix up into the 60, 70, 80% renewable category.
Yeah, I don't know if you're following the offshore wind leases that have already been sold, but they go all the way from here, Boston area, all the way down to the Carolinas. And the future looks incredible as far as producing offshore renewable energy. And then what I read is that California just started selling some of their leases on the Pacific coast. So the future actually looks very good, as far as what I'm seeing.
The future for wind generally looks fantastic, and the
Yeah.
future for offshore wind, I'm 100% with you on. I haven't looked specifically at U.S. offshore, or at least I haven't looked in the last 15 years. But generally, the capacity factor you get offshore is roughly 2x the capacity factor you get onshore.
Right.
So if you can bring down the installation costs, which the turbine manufacturers are doing by making the wind turbines bigger and bigger, you bring down the capital cost, you get the benefit of the increased capacity factor. It's dramatically going to reduce the cost of wind power,
Mm-hmm.
which will benefit not just the U.S. So it's going to benefit the world. So whether
Yeah.
whether it's U.S. or North Sea or Australia, wherever it is, there's very attractive offshore wind resources
Mm-hmm.
that are still yet to be tapped. So I agree. There's bright future there. I agree. There's bright future on solar as well as that technology continues to scale up in
Right.
size. It's probably getting close to a plateau level on cost per kilowatt or
Mm-hmm.
cost per watt. But I think there's some opportunity left on solar to increase the efficiency.
Right. Oh, yeah. Our offshore wind project is 30 miles offshore, and they bring that cable in and they land it right here in East Hampton. But out there, 30 miles out, it's considered to be the Saudi Arabia of wind, all uninterrupted wind. And the amount of energy that they are telling us that they can produce in these leased areas that have already been sold is just amazing.
Yep, absolutely. I think Texas says the same thing. They're the Saudi Arabia of wind, and the Dakotas say the same thing. So it's there is ample wind resource to be tapped.
Right.
And 30 miles, I think, just put this in your file, because 30 miles offshore sounds like a lot now, and 10 years from now we'll look back at 30 miles and think that was close in.
Right.
Because they're going to get greater and greater.
Right. Well, yeah, especially now. I mean, I'm actually born in Norway, and I learn about all the offshore oil rigs they have, and they make in Norway, which they are not tethered to the bottom, and they're put in place. They stay in place with thrusters and GPS technology, and we don't need it here on the East Coast, but they're telling us that over on the West Coast, the way it drops off, that's what they're going to be installing there. But that's an interesting technology also.
It is, and I'm not 100% sure which way it's going to evolve, because the what you're talking about is floating offshore wind. So
Right.
there's a trade-off between the incremental capacity factor you get even further offshore
Mm-hmm.
relative to the transmission cost and the installation cost of trying to have a floating turbine. So I look at this and say we don't need to start with the highest degree of difficulty. And it's a very similar story on CO2 reduction generally. We don't need to start with direct air capture on CO2 until we've exhausted the abundance of high CO2 concentration emissions. And once we work our way down that list, the the power plants and the refineries and the cement plants and the steel plants and paper mills and all the other relatively high concentration emitters. Once we've exhausted that, then we can start talking about, do you need to extract CO2 from the air?
Yeah,
So,
I agree with that. Something we haven't talked about on this pod yet is sustainable aviation fuel. Can you talk about how Honeywell's technology is supporting the aviation sector's effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
yeah, no, absolutely, and it's an exciting space for Honeywell and for the aviation industry. So Honeywell has a renewable fuels technology that is able to take essentially non-hydrocarbon feeds and convert them into equivalent jet fuel to what comes out of a barrel of oil today.
Mm-hmm.
So we started 15, 16 years ago now with feeds that come from used cooking oil or animal fat or waste grease. And we put that with our partners through what we call an eco-fining process.
Mm-hmm.
And that produces, depending on what the customer wants, either a renewable diesel, which frequently gets sold into California, or it produces a sustainable aviation fuel, which the airlines then blend with traditional aviation fuel and are able to burn in aircraft with no modifications to what they have today.
Is that very similar to what we're doing with alcohol and putting and mixing it with our gas?
The blending is extremely similar.
Okay.
And it's funny you should mention it because the new technology that we introduced after the fats and oils is an ethanol to sustainable aviation fuel technology.
Oh, wow.
So the same ethanol that is blended into gasoline in
Mm-hmm.
various parts of the world, we can take instead and through an eco-fining process convert it into SAF.
Mm.
There's another technology that Honeywell is developing and will be validating with partners and validating at scale with partners is taking carbon dioxide
Mm-hmm.
and green hydrogen and converting that combination into SAF.
And they'll be able to use the same jet engines and everything like that? There's no modification required?
So there's no modification required today, generally up to a 50% SAF to non-SAF blend.
Okay.
I believe, and the industry believes, we can go higher than 50%. We just need to go through the regulatory approval process to make sure that obviously we meet all the same safety standards that exist
Right.
today.
Right.
We're a far ways away from 50%. So we'll work on problem 2 while we build out the capacity to address the first 50%.
Right. And those requirements are very strict. I'm a pilot, so I'm pretty well versed in dealing with the FAA and all the requirements for what you have to do to keep your plane
So my
up
son-in-law
to
is a pilot, and I am a frequent passenger of multiple airlines. So
right.
I appreciate the strictness of the safety regulations, and obviously we're not going to do anything that circumvents any of those.
No.
Chemically, the SAF that comes from our existing eco-fining process is identical to the chemical composition of a Jet A or a kerosene that comes out of a traditional refinery.
Okay. That's very interesting. GE Technology will license Honeywell's upcycle process technology at their planned recycling facility in South Korea. Can you give us a little more background on what's called the circular plastics economy?
Yeah, so I mean, this is another exciting platform in the broad Honeywell STS offering. So what we have is which either referred to as advanced recycling or chemical recycling, but we're able to take waste plastics and we're focusing on the portion of waste plastics that aren't easily recycled mechanically.
Mm-hmm.
And we're able to take this stream of waste plastics and through our process, convert it back into a feedstock, which is then sold to the chemical companies to go back into plastics. So the circularity is obviously it's plastics to plastics, full chain.
How long have you been working on this technology?
A decade,
Really?
give or take. I don't want to overstate, but yeah.
Because we're surrounded by oceans and water here, the whole, since China stopped taking our recycled plastics, become a huge issue. And people, it's on the front burner here locally. It's like the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And a lot of people trying to figure out what we can do to plastics. But I think this is a great solution.
So I agree, and it's one of many solutions. So
Right.
So it's similar to really all the sustainability issues. You have to come at it from multiple angles.
Right.
The first angle on any waste is pretty much nowhere in the world is there a perfectly effective mechanism for collecting and separating recyclable materials.
Mm-hmm.
So you start with, we generate a huge amount of waste, obviously in the United States and elsewhere. A small percentage of that is effectively captured. A small percentage of what is potentially recyclable is actually recycled.
Yeah.
We believe there's an opportunity to dramatically increase the availability of recycled materials.
Mm-hmm.
And we think Honeywell's contribution to that is providing technologies that make the recycling more economic. And again, this is back to providing the right market signals. So if we can increase the attractiveness of processing waste film, people will find ways to collect and provide the waste film for recycling.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I think we all have a long way to go, actually, with the amount of plastics that we have. Actually, it's just amazing. Thank you for spending your time with us. Is there anything you want to add?
No, other than thanks, and it was a pleasure talking to you. And if I'm ever in your part of the woods, I would very much like to see how you're thinking through the short and mid and long term for solving the energy mix and energy security in a specific part of New York.
Yeah, we have a great opportunity here in the Hamptons because the houses that we build, the clients have budgets, and we find clients who want to do innovative projects, which is great for us. So anytime you're in New York, you want to come out to the Hamptons, look me up. I'd love to have you, and I'll show you around.
Okay, well, I can afford to visit.
Okay, yeah.
But I appreciate the offer, and I'll take you up on it because I come to New York frequently.
Great. That wraps up another episode of Decarbonizing the World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, make sure you take a second to subscribe so you automatically get my new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I'd love if you left me a review so more folks like yourself can discover the show. Until next time, take care.
This has been Decarbonize the World with Frank Deline. To connect with Frank and to learn more about clean energy, reducing fossil fuels, and increasing profits, go to frankdeline.com. Decarbonize the World is a production of Advantage Audio.